Welcome to the episode number 9 of Experts of the Americas, led by the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. My name is Camila Hernandez. I am Assistant Director and Colombia Lead, and I am honored to welcome Jacobo Tovar, a fellow Colombian and also a Caleño, Director of Comfandi, a privately owned nonprofit company that provides healthcare, education, and housing, among other services.
Thank you, Camila. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here and hopefully get a point across so that everybody can hear and share.
Thank you, Jacobo. We're glad to have you. So first, a bit of context. Amid the third peak of the pandemic, Colombia faces the longest and most destructive protests in recent history. They first erupted on April 28th over a now canceled tax reform bill. And they have continued over a month. To date, dozens of people have died and also thousands have been injured. Jacobo, I would love to start by you telling us who exactly is protesting and why, and tell us a bit about the evolution of the protests in the past month.
Sure. Protests erupted April 28th, as you were saying, due to the proposed tax bill, which has already been taken off the legislature. At the beginning, Camila, I would say that the protesters were backed by many Colombians. I mean, there are very strong reasons for peaceful manifestations and for peaceful protests in Colombia. Colombia has a very high rate of inequality, and there's always a discussion of how to deal with inequality. And I think personally, the approach has to be two-sided. One, you have to lift people out of poverty, and you also have to have a very structured both tax reform or tax and government expenditure to close in the gap between the better off Colombians with the people that are worse off. As I was saying at the beginning, it met with a lot of sympathy and a lot of empathy from a lot of sides. Even business, I would say, would have agreed that there still are very good reasons for peaceful demonstrations, and there's a lot of change that has to happen in Colombia. And I think Colombia has been doing that for the last 21 years. I mean, Colombia has lifted a lot of people out of poverty, but we're still struggling to close the gap between the rich, the better off, and the people that are worse off. But those protests quickly developed into blockades. And they started blocking main highways around Colombia and also roads in the inside of different cities, specifically Cali. We've been at the epicenter of what's been happening, and these blockades, both roads and in the city level, have led to a lot of things. One of the main things that has happened is a lot of vandalism associated with the blockades. I think there's a lot of genuine people are protesting, but I think the protest has been infiltrated, perhaps. And for at least Comfandi has been, we've had schools vandalized. One of them even severely damaged and burnt, where our computers were stolen, desks were stolen, doors, bathroom tiles, everything. Another one was also vandalized, not to the extent as the first one. It was not burnt, at least, but it was very heavily vandalized. We've had first response clinics. We have a web of first response primary care clinics inside the different neighborhoods in Cali, specifically in low-income neighborhoods. We've had 2 of those vandalized out of 20 that we have. We've had supermarkets and drugstores vandalized also. But people are not allowed to move freely throughout the city. We've been living like this for the last 40 odd days, where you always have to check if you can actually leave your home, if you can travel safely. People are having to pay tolls, illegal tolls, so that they can go through the blockades. If you don't pay, you can have your car either vandalized or your motorcycle, your bike stolen. There's been a shortage of food, which has been slowly recuperating, But the first 15 days, 3 weeks of the blockades were very tough on food supply. There's a shortage of fuel. People were not able to go to grocery stores, to their jobs. They were basically stuck, I would say, sequestered at home, kidnapped at home. And things started to develop from what we knew as a peaceful protest on the eve of April 28th. It started to degrade into what we have now, which is a lot of people are still protesting for genuine reasons, but a lot of unrest, a lot of vandalism, and what we see that it's been infiltrated by people that just want to raise chaos.
Yeah, and I think the numbers tell a bit of that story in terms of perceptions. We saw that the first 2 weeks of the protests, about over 70% of Colombians were in favor of the protests, and about also 70% were against blockades. But after a month, the percentage of the population that was in favor of protests fell to about 50%. And also the people that were against blockades went up to about 80. So we are seeing this shift in perceptions and this shift in the evolution of the protests as well. And I wanted to talk more about what you already started mentioning in terms of the socioeconomic effects of the blockades and the vandalism. How are both of these things affecting Colombian workers and Colombian businesses in the short term? And also, what are the implications, long-term implications of the situation in terms of employment, investment, and societal well-being in general?
Well, Camila, I would start off by saying that since before the pandemic, Cali has had a typically high unemployment rate. We're hitting somewhere between 10% or 11% of unemployment rate. This is looking back at March 2020. Then the pandemic struck, and then our numbers started increasing. Obviously, Colombia was very strict in its shutting down of movement in the economy and closing down cities, so that the virus wouldn't spread as quickly as it might have had if we didn't do that. And we hit a lot of the economy was hit very hard. Specifically, I'm talking about places of gathering. I'm talking about restaurants, places where you get your haircut, supermarkets where you had to queue outside and you could only go certain days of the week. And a lot of mom and pop stores got hurt really bad. So unemployment started growing, probably started hitting 14, 15%, 16% by mid-pandemic. And then we have this civil social unrest, and we're now projecting that that the damage to the economic fiber or the entrepreneurial business fabrics of Cali, at least Cali and the Valle del Cauca region, might raise unemployment levels beyond 25 to 30% in the coming months. There's a lot of starting up that has already begun. A lot of the blockades outside of Cali have been lifted. So we now have a calm, and we can move around through some parts of Cali, but there's some blockades that persist. But the long-term effect is that a lot of small businesses have had their cash flows deeply hurt, and they don't have any more cash to keep going. We're still trying to find out what's happening to them. Big businesses always have a larger cash flow, and they can always weather the storm a lot better. So I'm not particularly worried about what's going to happen there. The big business has been very conscious about keeping employment, about paying their wages, and even though they've been shut down and they're restarting already, I'm very worried about what's happening downstream with smaller businesses that have been hit very hard and don't have the cash reserves that the larger corporations have. So we're still looking, but I would say that if you look at indices that reflect optimism or pessimism about the economy, when you look at those indices, they're very dire. And what the response we're getting from small businesses is that they're struggling and they will be struggling for the next couple of months. And some of them, given what happened during the month of May even go out of business. A lot of them have already started to shut down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think long-term, medium to long-term employment will depend basically on how many businesses need to shut down operations as a result of the situation. And we're already seeing businesses close. A big percentage of the companies in the country have halted operations or are only operating partially. And also recently, in terms of investment in the long term, Standards and Poor's reduced Colombia's credit rating from BB minus to BB plus, which is just moved the country's debt to junk bond status and is hurting future economic growth.
Right.
Everything that you mentioned has implications in the long term and that will be carried out into the next year. And the national strike has been very polarizing for the Colombian society. What do you foresee are the implications of the situation for the upcoming presidential elections?
Well, I can't really separate what's been going on from the start of an election year. And I'm talking May 2021 to May 2022. And we have a congressional election on March 2022. So it coincides suspiciously with a long election year. And what we see, Camila, is as you were saying, a polarizing of the Colombian opinion. And I consider myself to be a person of, in terms of politics, very, very center. I like the center. I think the center is, to me at least, it's where the answer is to most of our issues. But what the strike has managed to unfortunately do is to polarize people and put people that were usually in the center, and they've been fleeing to the extremes. And I've seen many people going from a very centered position to the very right or to the very left. And I think that breeds it breeds for a perfect storm next year in terms of our elections. And that's very unfortunate because I think when we start that campaign road for our next presidential election, what we're going to see is a candidate from the extreme right versus a candidate for the extreme left, and I'm hoping that there'll be somebody for the middle, which I think the answer will be in the middle, and it won't be in any of the extremes. But definitely, Colombian politics will be radicalized, will be polarized, and so is the public opinion. The public opinion is very radicalized or very polarized in terms of right and left, in terms of us against them or them against us. And I think that makes for a very dangerous mix.
Thank you, Jacobo. And historically, Colombia has been a very strong ally of the United States. It has gained more and more leadership in the region, hosting the largest diaspora of Venezuelans, also cooperating with the US on security in Central and South America. How could the United States support Colombia, its ally, at this critical moment?
I think, Camila, the main thing I would ask, if I could talk to President Biden or somebody up in the White House or up in the state in the US, is please back Colombian institutionality. It's very important to have the backing of the United States for our institutions. And I think those have to remain. We've been a democratic country for 200 years now. We had a brief interruption in the 50s where we had a dictatorship, but ever since we've been a democratic country. We've had a good track record on being democratic. We've got a good track record in terms of our international debt. We've got a good track record in being the US's ally in the war against drugs, which Colombia has had the big part of the burden. But I think the US definitely sees us as an ally, which is very good. I would ask them to keep backing our institutionality, which is particularly the one that is at risk when headed into an election year that's going to be highly polarized between extremes. If we don't keep an eye on the center, we don't keep an eye on the institutions, we might lose them, and we might end up either way with a populist, autocratic government, be either right or left, which definitely is a sour point for democracy.
Thank you, Jacobo. And I think this is a especially important point of supporting Colombia's institutions, as we are seeing democratic backsliding across the region and our neighbor Venezuela, which has had a failed democracy for years now. I would love to offer you a few minutes to give any closing thoughts before ending the episode.
Oh, well, but just thank you. I hope these what we've talked about is heard. I really believe in backing our institutionality. I think, as I was saying before, democracy has been in Colombia for a way of life for 200 years. We even joke in Colombia we have an excess of democracy. We like to consult everything. Our brand new constitution, which is from 1991, is a constitution that is very in defense of all rights. And among those rights are the community's right to determine what, how, and who does things within that community, which is very good. So we have a lengthy process whenever you're investing in some parts of Colombia where you have to consult with these communities, and it might take forever, but it's a construction, and it's a construction in democracy. And I think those things have to be kept. And I think the backing of that institutionality is very rich for our democracy and for our democratic process. If we don't have that backing, and if we go to the extremes, we risk losing our democracy and falling the ways of our neighbors. And I think it'll be very dangerous, definitely, for all of us. It would be very dangerous, especially for us living in Colombia.
Thank you for your time, Jacobo. It was great to have you with us for episode 9 of Experts of the Americas.
Thank you, Camila. Thank you for having me.